The Sacramento Kings let go of head coach Mike Brown yesterday after a 5-game losing streak and an underperforming 13-18 record on the season. And to me, this firing is a reflection of the impatient and impulsive decisions that we've often seen in the NBA the last few seasons. This past offseason, for example, we saw the Timberwolves suddenly trade Karl Anthony Towns just before media day, even though they made the Western Conference Finals. This is the first time they made the Western Conference Finals since 2004, if I'm correct, or if it wasn't the Western Conference Finals that year, then it was pretty close of a deep playoff run, let's just say, right? And then even last season, right? The Bucks, they let go of Adrian Griffin despite leading them to a 30-13 record up to that point. And then right? You think back to 2017 when the Raptors fired Dwayne Casey after losing to yet another LeBron James-led Cavaliers team in the semifinals. Despite Dwayne Casey actually being named Coach of the Year eventually that season. So while some of the decisions made here can definitely be warranted, very often in this league do we see front offices simply get in their feelings and decide to play NBA 2K My GM in real life, I feel like. And, it just sucks. And I think we've seen it through the reactions of some of the NBA's coaches, most notably Michael Malone, right, who was a coach for this very Sacramento Kings organization. And he sounds off and says, to put it PG, it was a coward move, and no class, Rick Carlisle had came out and voiced his, how surprised he was that Mike Brown got fired. And then even Steve Kerr said, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it's because Mike Brown was very successful with the Sacramento Kings. And I know you might hear that and think I'm using the term very successful loosely, but remember, not everybody gets on these sidelines and they become, Greg Popovich, or they become Steve Kerr, Phil Jackson, Red Auerbach. The Kings hired Mike Brown and his impact was felt immediately. His smile lit up rooms. His intensity was felt in practice just as much as it was in the games. He challenged all his players from the stars to the last guy on the bench, and he had the experience to back it up. And when Mike Brown led huddles, all eyes were on him. And after a 30-52 record in 2021-22, Mike Brown comes in 2022-23 and improves the team to 48-34, right? They get 18 more wins than they did the previous season. And then even last season, right? Second year with the team, dips a little bit, but barely, right? They're 46-36. They unfortunately lost in the play-in tournament and failed to make the playoffs. But that's the nature of the Western Conference nowadays, right? The Western Conference is a very tough and pretty much always has been a very tough conference. They don't call it the Wild West for no reason, and I think that's why teams, especially out West, they make it a goal to win 50 games because it's really, really stinking hard to find a spot in the 8 available seeds if 11 of those teams are all really good. So as we see this year, the Kings are sitting around 12th place in the West generally, and I don't believe their underperformance is on Mike Brown. This one is in fact on the general manager, Monty McNair, if we're calling people by name. The Sacramento Kings built their game plan around high octane offense, right? They want to outpace you and force you to be the one to make adjustments. To me, they were like a hybrid of the Denver Nuggets and the Golden State Warriors, right? Much like how Denver, at their best, benefits from the dynamic of Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic, especially come playoff time, right? The Kings found a way to unleash De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis in similar two-man actions. And again, much like the Warriors, they valued shooting, right? If you're going to have a dynamic like that, you need to surround those guys with shooting. And, again, like the Warriors, they have one of the best home arenas in the NBA. So I see those two teams as like, if you put them together, you pretty much get the Sacramento Kings. It's a great formula for this new up-tempo style of NBA basketball, hence their record the last 2 seasons. But of course, all that is great for the regular season. After losing in 7 to the Warriors in 2023 and then crumbling in the play-in versus the Pelicans last season, it was clear they needed some extra help, right? That this high-octane dynamic that you have isn't going to cut it long-term in the Western Conference. Shooters miss, and investing in high-octane offense means sacrificing defense. De'Aaron Fox is fantastic. Malik Monk has it in him. But the playoffs, in the playoffs, teams game plan for that kind of thing. So when they get that big binder, I say this all the time on Hip to the Games. When teams get that huge binder with everything you've done over the course of an 82-game season, and they have a whole series to plan for you, things are going to change, right? So it's always nice for a team like the Kings in particular to have an extra go-to guy. So what do? This past offseason, they go get DeMar DeRozan, which I thought was perfect for them. Again, contrary to what most people think, I thought it was a pretty perfect fit in the sense that his buckets were going to come even easier playing off DHO's, dribble handoffs with Domantas Sabonis and then trading pick and rolls with De'Aaron Fox. DeMar DeRozan did not have to have the ball. He didn't have to bring it up all the time. He didn't always have to have it up top in a high pick and roll scenario just to score. He could come off screens, do a lot of off ball work. And I think, it showed early. And, not to mention, with DeMar DeRozan, the Kings add one of the best closers and shot creators in the game to go alongside another great closer and underrated shot creator at the point guard position in De'Aaron Fox. And the first few games of the season, like I said, flashes of that success showed. As DeMar had a surprisingly hot start, he was taking a lot of the shots, handling the ball the most in late game situations. I thought at that time it was really just the Kings trying to get over the chemistry hump, right? De'Aaron getting used to playing with DeMar getting used to playing with De'Aaron, and that was really it. However, I think many fans bring up this notion that, and again, even with this Mike Brown firing, right, I see some fans like, oh, the real issue is DeMar DeRozan. And, you got people saying, oh, well, he isn't a team player or his game doesn't translate to winning basketball. And if you look at his time in Toronto and San Antonio specifically, those statements couldn't be further from the truth. I know his playoff performances didn't bring ideal results in the grand scheme in Toronto, right? It didn't bring them a championship. But even as good and as deep as those teams were, he was the go-to guy. That was a major part of their 50-win seasons, all right? Because they had a guy that was going to absolutely get a bucket for them, And as far as his time with the Spurs, his game actually matured a great deal there, especially as far as playmaking. I thought rebounding he did really good over there and stepped it up some notches. He was a nice, I thought Greg Popovich used him well over there. They just didn't have they couldn't compete obviously with teams like Golden State and, whoever else was going crazy in the West at that time. And the thing I will say about that though is that I think what people really mean when they say that about DeMar DeRozan is that after 48 minutes, by the time the final buzzer sounds, you'll realize that much of DeMar's impact had to do with what he did with the basketball. He won't take charge of guarding the opposing team's best player in crunch time. He won't always shift his focus on making the right passes if his shot isn't falling. He doesn't bring that versatile mass effect the way someone like LeBron, Kevin Durant, or even what we've seen Jason Tatum, grow to show sometimes, right? He doesn't have that mass effect on a game as far as versatility. I think that's what people mean when they say that, because I think it's a bit foolish to say straight up that he doesn't play winning basketball or he isn't a team player, because like I said, I think it shows in his game that he can be those things. He's been on successful basketball teams, but I think more specifically, that's what people mean when they knock DeMar DeRozan. So I just wanted to clear that up as well. But focusing back on Sacramento as a whole, if you fast forward to today, with all that said, how does a team with such a high-powered offense on paper generally underperform, right? And they lose 13 clutch time games already this season, right? Most in the NBA, with two of the most clutch players in the league, right? It sounds crazy to think that. And they fire the same coach that got them to this point. How does any of that make sense? Well, two things come to mind instantly. Number one, the underperformance of their shooters, and two, the lack of defense on both the wings and the interior. So let's talk about the shooting. The Kings' primary shooters in rotation are Keegan Murray, Kevin Huerter, Malik Monk, and Keon Ellis. All right. I do want to acknowledge Doug McDermott, who they picked up from free agency. This is a guy who can knock down threes in his sleep, but his minutes are up and down. And I also want to shout out Trey Lyles, who is a respectable stretch four, shooting at around 37% from deep in, say, his 3.5 seasons with the Kings so far. But I wanted to highlight the guys that are expected to knock down a lot of catch and shoot threes for the team. First off, Keon Ellis, you could say, is safe, right? Because in the 4 shot attempts he gets a game, 3 of those shots are going to be threes, and he's shooting 41% from out there. So he's certainly doing his job. And even in just under 20 minutes a game, you can certainly make the argument that, he probably should have been playing even more with knowing that he can knock down threes in that regard. But again, a lot of depth is coming with the guards. De'Aaron Fox, DeMar DeRozan, Malik Monk, they're getting a large chunk of those guard minutes, so it makes sense. And then you go to Keegan Murray, right? On the other hand, this is a guy who's unfortunately seen his percentages decrease every year he's been in the league so far. It's just his 3rd season, plenty of room to grow, plenty of time to bounce back. But considering how in his rookie year, he broke the record for most threes made as a rookie and shot 41% from deep. Not so coincidentally, the same season they finished 3rd in the West. Last season, that number went down to 36%. And now this season, with 1 less attempt per game, he's now only shooting about 30% from deep. And only 42% from the field after shooting 45% from the field each of his first 2 seasons. So, in a nutshell, Keegan Murray is just really struggling to find his rhythm. And additionally, Kevin Huerter, this is also a guy that built a reputation as one of the more streaky 3-point shooters. His first few seasons in the league, obviously starting his career with Atlanta, generally around 38%, you could say, until last season where he went right back down to 36% and to what is now this season, and even worse, 31% from downtown. And then there's Malik Monk, who's been in that more Jamal Crawford, Nick Young category where he's not strictly a catch and shoot player, but it always helps when he's hitting those shots. Malik Monk has sat at a respectable but not great 35% from 3 each of his 3 seasons with the Kings now. So not necessarily getting better or worse. I think that's the thing, again, you can say about Malik is that, he is getting them up. And he is knocking them down more than he has in his career. So with that in mind, at least the brother is consistent, right? The averages are consistent, but he is getting a lot more attempts in his career and a lot more makes. So it kind of plays out well in that regard. But I just bring this up to say, obviously the team is going to lose more games if their once 40% 3-point shooter is now at 30%. Obviously, if multiple shooters' percentages are down in general, that isn't Mike Brown's fault. A coach can draw up all the plays, give all the motivation in the world and wisdom straight from the Bible. But at the end of the day, that coach has 0 effect on the ball actually going into the hoop. They have 0 physical effect on that happening. That's on the players, right? And I've missed some Kings games recently, so I'm not sure if, they're just throwing up a lot of grenades, right? Are they late shot clock, hurried threes? Are they shooting more contested threes? Is it simply a rhythm thing? But the decrease in efficiency certainly shows in the numbers. And then I even want to take it a step further because what's crazy? The Houston Rockets are 28th in 3-point percentage, and they're currently 2nd in the West, right? The Orlando Magic are dead last in 3-point percentage as a team, right? And again, we've seen them be, in kind of that top half of the East. And yet the Kings are better than both of those teams, even though they're 24th. Their team 3-point percentage is better than both of those teams. But those teams are somehow still better. They are legit playoff eligible teams right now as opposed to the Sacramento Kings. And why is that? Because those teams have defense. The Kings lack perimeter and interior defense. So really they lack defense in general. I think that's another reason why they've been underperforming. There is no defensive anchor on that last line. A lot of their defenders on the perimeter are either undersized or just subpar. De'Aaron Fox can get after it defensively. And I've even seen DeMar DeRozan show an impressive knack to get in the passing lanes this season. He's currently averaging the best steals numbers of his career, which is pretty crazy to think about considering how long he's been in the league. But those are some bright spots. And, I have seen Keegan Murray take pride in guarding guys like Anthony Edwards, Jason Tatum, he's usually the one getting that star player assignment, due to his length at 6'8". Keon Ellis, he's also a high energy defender at 6'4". Isn't perfect, but high energy, never gives up, hustles. You love guys like that. But like I said, with a lot of those guys, Outside of those guys I mentioned, a lot of these guys are around 6'5", 6'6". Like I said, Keon Ellis is just 6'4". And a lot of the other guys are just generally weaker defenders. And, it doesn't help their overall impact on defense. And remember, too, last year they had a guy, or if it wasn't last year, the year before, they had a guy like JaVale McGee who they could throw inside, even in just spot minutes. He wasn't getting crazy minutes, but they could throw him inside, and he knew how to protect the rim, right? Even when JaVale McGee was the butt of every NBA joke, the one thing he knew how to do was protect that rim. So he had the same role in spot minutes. That's all he focused on. And even the year before that, right, on the perimeter, they had extra size on the wings and guys like Harrison Barnes, Mezi Matu, right, 6'8", 6'9", lanky guys, along with a guy like Keegan Murray. And then, you had a defensive-minded guard off the bench in Davion Mitchell. Again, even though he's about 6 foot, 6'1", very tenacious defender, got drafted for his defense, and to this very day is playing some really great perimeter defense. They had more options to work with in the interior on the perimeter. But on this roster, they don't have those extra options that would make their defense a bit better. This team has primarily thrived off offense in particular. And because they put all their eggs in one basket or all their cowbells in one farm or one band, you could say, they are suffering the consequences from that decision, which again, isn't Mike Brown's fault. To me, that's on the GM. So rather than making the hard decision to trade some guys, maybe, again, trade some guys that were once valuable to the success, maybe trade a Kevin Huerter, trade a Trey Lyles, or even a Keon Ellis in favor of getting some defense, getting some versatility. Instead of doing all that, Monty McNair and the front office did the easiest cop-out thing you could do in management, and that's point the finger at the coach and decide to let him go. It's what we see in sports time and time again, stubborn front offices who think the team should be playing way better than the collection of talent they actually have in the locker room. So it'll be interesting to see what Doug Christie does as coach of the Kings now that he's the interim coach. He was one of the better perimeter defenders in the league in his playing days. His most memorable years coming from his time with the Kings. He's been involved with the organization for such a long time, whether it was playing, color commentary, assistant coaching, and then now he's climbed up and is getting this opportunity as the head coach. So he's almost worn all the hats for this franchise. Maybe he can prove me wrong and unlock something new with this team, or hopefully it allows the Kings to actually look at the real issues they have on the court and not point the finger towards the sidelines. And mind you, this comes in terrible timing, knowing that your star player, De'Aaron Fox, his extension is on the line, and he's been vocal about possibly being open to other destinations should the Kings not form a formidable contender for the future. So should they disappoint him, they could very well be looking at a rebuild again much sooner than they anticipated.